Going on this evening with our discussion of Yoga Explained, referring back to last week's discussion of the soul, just one or two important things to remember. This simple rule whereby you can tell whether you are in soul consciousness in a dynamic way or whether you are in ego consciousness. You remember we talked about it? The think is to be identified with the attached soul or ego. That is to think. Whenever you are thinking and perusing your thoughts, discriminating or considering what's going on in your mental processes, you are in the attached soul or ego. And so to think is to be attached to the ego, or one with the ego. Not to think, nor be unconscious. Be fully awake, aware, is to be in the consciousness of the soul. And so when you meditate, introspect yourselves and see just where you are. If you're in the realm of thought, leave it behind. And if you are in that consciousness, wherein there are no thoughts, but you feel stealing over your soul a deep-seated peace and bliss, and you do not slip into sleep or unconsciousness, know that is soul consciousness. And so when you meditate deeply, you are in the state of deep sleep, which is state of soul every night in sleep. In deep sleep, we are in soul consciousness with God. So if you can do it consciously through your meditation, after a while it will become a habit, and it will be with you, not just sporadically or intermittently, but all the time, continuously. So remember those two things about the soul. They're simple things, but if you will just introspect yourself, find out where you are, then you can correct it if you are in ego consciousness. That isn't what we want. We want to know the soul within us. And so, going on now with the soul, the very important point to bring out is this, that some people make the mistake in thinking that, which is far from being true. Because when there is renunciation of activity, then there's atrophy. Atrophy sets in. If you do not use your arm and just keep it inactive, it'll shrivel up. And so, if we are not active in this worldly consciousness, we will atrophy. And that is not the way to freedom or to soul consciousness. But the way is through a balance between activity and meditation, or vice versa. Master used to say a balance is necessary between meditation and activity. Now there is a psychological point there which I must bring out at this time, and it has to do with the practice of yoga. Why should we practice yoga? Why should we fool around with yoga? It is for this reason. Through the practices of yoga, in which we find the process of meditation, which means concentration on God. When we do that, we create within us a certain definite current. A definite current is imbued, so to speak, in our consciousness by the practice of meditation. This current is induced when you meditate. When you don't meditate, it is not induced. Because when you meditate, remember, meditation means concentration on God. Your consciousness is on Him as the holy vibration at the Christ center, or in the heart as His love, or the great cosmic sound of Om. Now, when you do that, there's a definite current induced within you that is not induced in any other activity. This is a very important psychological point. Remember, right meditation induces within you a definite current. Now what happens? When that becomes a habit, that current is carried over into your ordinary activity, daily activity. And that's why Master says, right activity, or activity to please God, is as good as meditation. Now at first you will not be able to, that current will not stay with you. It'll stay for a while. You all know that. Then it recedes. But after a while it becomes a habit or a second nature, and everything you do in this world existence to please God is as good as meditation. That's a wonderful point, because sometimes we cannot meditate as long as we'd like to, nor as deep as we'd like to. But when we do meditate, this particular current, the wave, the current changes, and that is carried over into your activity. And that's why there's a chance to win this battle. When the habit is formed, then you're more and more with God. So don't think your meditation or your yoga is useless or in vain. It is not. The more you are in it, the more it will be with you, and every activity will be a song to God. Until finally, through His grace, you will continuously be in that current. That current will continuously flow, and everything you do is worshiping God. That's the most wonderful thing. I used to wonder why the Master said, right activity is as good as meditation. I always thought meditation was the only thing. Meditation is that point from which we leap toward the infinite. And that current, once started, permeates your being, and although you lose it and come back and meditate again, finally it will become a habit. And so whatever you do for God. You are with Him. And then liberation comes, when that current is established and will not return the other way. Then you are liberated. These are wonderful things, and explain why Master said a balance is necessary between meditation and activity. And remember, both will take you to God if you establish the habit wherein you are in His consciousness in your meditation. When the thoughts have gone to rest, and you feel the love of the infinite flowing through you, silently like a thief in the night, that will permeate your action, whatever it is, and finally that will be always with you. There will be no returning to this delusion of outward consciousness and living. Such is truth. All true scriptures, all true religions point to this underlying truth. That's why a balance is necessary between soul communion and activity. In this ordinary world, God's kingdom is not just that kingdom beyond the ordinary kingdom of the senses. God's kingdom is in all things. He is in matter. He is in this kingdom here. The material kingdom is part of God's kingdom. Behind this is the astral kingdom, more subtle. Behind that is the causal kingdom, or the kingdom of God's great thoughts. Now we're used to this outward physical part of God's kingdom, but we cannot always see the other side. But it can be done through right meditation. Then you see the kingdom of finer forces, or the spiritual or astral kingdom. Then you go beyond that and you see the causal kingdom. They all constitute the kingdom of God, everything. Don't you think that beautiful rose is in the kingdom of God? When you look behind, you see the light vibrating behind that rose. That's the kingdom of energy, still the kingdom of God, and behind that is His thought which produced that beautiful thing. That's the kingdom of God. Now, realize that sustaining all these three kingdoms is the great cosmic sound of Om. And so when you hear it in your meditation, you are with God. And if you keep on hearing it and merge in it, as that Om penetrates, permeates all of God's kingdom, physical, astral, and causal, so will your consciousness travel throughout eternity. Because there's only one God, and He's sitting in the hearts of each one of us. And so yoga is worthwhile if you use it to attain salvation, of course. And so the ideal way is by yoga introspection and yogic meditation. That means whatever meditation gives you union, to know the soul, and that should be followed by doing your duty in this worldly existence, but carrying God with you in everything you do. Herein is established or fulfilled or carried to fulfillment the two commandments. Thou shalt first love the Lord thy God with all thy strength and with all thy might. And secondly, thou shalt love those in whom God is seated, each one of us. He is seated within the hearts of all of us. And so the work we do to please Him, because He's in everything we are working with, human beings and inanimate objects, so spoken of. So yoga is worthwhile, isn't it? So God contact can and does come in action. Don't forget this. Don't think you've got to run off to some mountain and sit there in a cave until you're half dead to find God. It's not necessary. Master told me many times, he says, you have everything right here. You can find Him any place you are. And so the first thing is, by concentrated action, after you do your meditation, perhaps in the morning you meditate an hour or so, you've induced that spiritual current within you. Now carry it into your everyday action. Do that. Feel God in everything you do. And you will feel Him in you. Why? Because when God created all things, Ananda came forth. That's the joy of God. The joy of creating something is in everything that He has created. And when you work feeling His presence, you will feel that. Now in your meditations, when you go direct to the source of creation, which is the presence of God within us, you will feel His bliss. That's the ideal way. And so the easiest way that we not make a mistake is everything we do, like it somehow. In other words, do it to please God. And you must like it, because He gives us everything. Friends, those near and dear to us, everything we have comes from Him. If we could just knock that into our heads, then this work wouldn't be half so bad, would it? Let us realize these two things are necessary. Meditation, wherein you contact the presence of God within, and start the ball rolling, so to speak, toward His kingdom. Induce that spiritual current which flows and starts towards His kingdom, and then work in this everyday work, feeling His presence, until finally it is established, and there's no returning to delusion, no returning to being tossed around by the mind, and all that goes with it. Ever joy, 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 ever new joy, all the time. Or you realize your birthright, which is God's love. And in this holy place, when you come, leave the troubles outside. They'll be waiting for you there just the same. But when you leave this place, they'll have no hold on you. Many have testified to that. And I think that if we remember that wonderful thing, which has been scientifically shown, I can't give you just the exact detail, about the reverse of the current when you meditate. But I know it does happen. And I know it stays with us, so to speak, and permeates our being. Just like Swami Vivekananda said, when you establish ecstasy or samadhi, when you return, you are not the same. When you sleep every night, you go with God, but you're practically the same when you wake up. But when through ecstasy you feel the presence of God, when you return, you're different. And so every time you meditate and feel the thoughts go to rest and feel the bliss and peace of God's presence, when you return, you are not the same. And you carry that through your everyday action until finally there's no returning to that old illusion of this world existence. Master's promised all who will humbly follow Him this salvation. So let us do it. Now, another thing, the practice of the science of yoga will give us a tranquil mind. It's a very important thing. And this is a must in soul realization. Unless the mind is tranquil, you cannot know soul. It's impossible, because in soul consciousness there is no lack of tranquility. The thoughts have gone to rest. And then comes in the intuition of the soul, whereby we know, as God knows all things. So tranquility is a must. If you are to know the soul, tranquility is a very difficult thing to attain. That's why Master said the saints never lose their calmness. Think of it. No matter what happens, can you retain that calmness? That's what we must do. And so, what is it? A restless mind is that which keeps us separated from God. If you cannot control the action of your mind and the thoughts, God's great, silent, subtle, loving love cannot enter you. Because He is a very jealous God and He wants you all for Himself. Because we left Him in the beginning. And so He's going to be sure that we want Him once more. These are important truths. And so, tranquility of mind removes the separation we feel from God. Because the lack of tranquility means there's movement in our mind. And when there's movement, when there's thought, God cannot come in. The intuition cannot give us and show us and manifest God's love. Because it is not known through the senses nor reason, mind nor intellect. But it is easily known through affection and love. That's why right yoga, or scientific yoga, or we might call it complete yoga, is so important, or yoga of salvation, because that gives us contact with God. Of course, hatha yoga gives us contact with God in the physical body, but that's gross. Behind that is the subtle body. Right yoga gives you contact with the body of energy and with the holy vibration. And finally, if you surrender fully to God, you'll be one with that holy vibration through God's grace. Now, just to augment that point about tranquility, so important. In this world today, everything's in a mess, isn't it? Everything. Terrible confusion. And yet, when you meditate, where is that confusion? It disappears. Such is the grace of God. And so, I'd like to read just a word or two from Master's Samadhi, which simply means that through having attained tranquility of the mind, then he knows or feels the one ever-present, eternal God the Father. And so just the last words of it. Thou art I am thou. As Shankara said, I am he, blessed Spirit, I am he. Try and feel as I read these words of the Master. Feel your oneness with God. You are. But delusion says you aren't. You are that. Thou art I am thou, knower, knowing, knower, known as one. Tranquil, unbroken thrill, eternally living, ever new peace, enjoyable, beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi bliss. You cannot expect it enough. When you feel the love of the infinite Father that comes in that state, when you realize there's no separation between you, that's as near as you can say, as Master has said. Not an unconscious state. Not an unconscious state. Or mental chloroform without willful return. Samadhi but extends my conscious realm beyond the limits of this mortal frame to the farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little bubble of ego floating in me. Why? Because the Om vibration permeates, it is space. And when you are one of that Om vibration, so are you throughout, as he says, where I, the cosmic sea, the great sea of God's consciousness and bliss, watch the little bubble of ego floating in me. And then finally, near the end, from joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt. Ocean of mind, I drink all creation's waves, the four veils of solid, liquid, vapor, light, lift aright. Myself in everything enters the great myself. You cannot know this through the senses, mind, or intellect, but it is easily perceivable through love and affection for your Father and my Father. Gone forever the fitful, flickering shadows of mortal memory. You never want them again if you can get out of them. Gone forever the fitful, flickering shadows of mortal memory. Spotless is my mental sky. Below, ahead, and high above, eternity and I, one united ray. The tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself. From Master Samadhi, a most wonderful poem. Be still and know that I am God. In the stillness you will know that, but not in the restlessness of mundane consciousness. And so a few references at this time from first Hindu philosophy, a few words from the Upanishads, just to show you that underneath this outward seeming reality is the true reality of God's presence. And so from the Upanishads, in the midst of activity alone, if I feel the peace and bliss of God, wilt thou desire to live 100 years? But the if is, if you feel the peace and God of bliss in God. If you feel that, it'll make no difference whether you're working or not. That's what the Upanishads mean. He who thinks that one can reach God by running away from the world is still in delusion. Master used to say a story about a saint that told, or somebody told his devotee that when he went into the river, it washed all his troubles away, his habits and bad habits and such things. But the saint said, oh no, when you come out you'll find them on the trees of the bank, all ready to pounce on you again. So the Upanishads say, he who thinks that one can reach God by running away from the world is still in delusion. Right now, where we are, let us grasp him now. He can be known in a moment, the saints say. Joy reigns when all work becomes the path of union of soul with God. You see, the key is not in what you're doing, or where you're doing it, or how you're doing it. It is that union with God, no matter what you're doing. And finally, only those of tranquil minds, and none else, can attain abiding joy by realizing within their souls the being who manifests the one essence in a multiplicity of forms. Realize that in each heart is sitting God. But when you do away the individuality, ego, the I, there you find the one Father. And He's in the hearts of all. And those devotees who feel Him, when they come together, they know it. They feel His love. That's the communion of saints, which each one can have. So much from the Upanishads. Now from the Gita discourse, 18th to 33rd line, which is very helpful in understanding the difference between delusion and the underlying reality of unity of God's consciousness. The unwavering firmness by which, through yoga, one restraineth the activity of the mind and of the life breath and of the sense organs, that firmness is pure. If no matter how racing the mind is, you can hang on, and hang on to the love of the infinite, you will win. And also the senses will be left behind, and the breath stills down and stops. Then you're in the presence of soul consciousness. From the Bhagavad Gita. One more reference I have from the autobiography, which I think you would like, about yoga. Yoga is a method for restraining the natural turbulence of thoughts. how turbulent our minds are. Which otherwise impartially prevent all men in all lands from glimpsing their true nature of spirit. Just that restless mind. And what a mind it is. Yoga cannot know a barrier of east and west any more than does the healing and equitable light of the sun. So long as man possesses a mind with its restless thoughts, so long will there be a universal need for yoga or control. So yoga is really essential and necessary. Just one reference from the Bible, Matthew the 6th chapter, 33rd verse, one which you are familiar with. Jesus knew, seek first the kingdom of God, and all other things shall be added unto you. He knew that God can be perceived only when by yoga we still the restless mind. Finally, a reference for inspiration from that great saint, Guru Nanak. He says things in such a deep and pointed way. They are so wonderful. And this is what we read. Listen carefully. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. There is one eternal Father. He is in every one of us. It is Him whom we must have. And so the great Nanak says, bow, O yogi, in obeisance unto Him, and Him alone, who is the beginning of all, the spotless, Himself without beginning, the indestructible, of the life vesture one, through all ages. He's the one we want. Another little part of the same passage, such a yogi does not confine himself in obscurity, nor to a single sect. He belongs to the entire humanity, to the entire brotherhood of man, to all. What did Master preach? Fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man. United States of the world. Master was one of the greatest adherents to the unity of God as one in all things. Such a yogi, having conquered his mind, has conquered the world. So that mind is the thing, that little mind. The next time we go on, I have, I think, one or two more talks about soul, and finally the spiritual eye, which is quite an important subject.